sure. All right. So, Ken invited me to do this, and admittedly, I actually don't know that much about Burns, but there you have it. So, so it was fun to have a challenge to learn something, and that's what I'm doing. So, anyways, in the 18th century, there was this myth among the primitivists, which were these natural poets, supposedly, who could warble their native wood tones, and they independent of any art or any kind of literary tradition, supposedly. And these poets were sought after by, like, the proletariat and the peasants because they felt that it would protect them from the artificiality of the modern life, and at that time, the industrial age growing. And so they sought after these kind of poets. And Burns, when he published his first book of poetry, and when he was like 27, he was referred to as the heaven-taught plowman. And he really dug that, and he thought it was really cool because he was suddenly in society in Edinburgh. And he liked this poet by instinct. But the reality was that he was not just this farm boy who showed up warbling poetry, but he was actually very well educated, mostly self-educated. Anyways, he kind of comes from this. At that era, at that time, most people were kind of neoclassicists who hung out in salons and wabbled on about poetry and literature, etc. But he looked more to older poets, I think 15th, 16th century poets, Scottish poets, and that's really where he got his inspiration to do what he did. And when he was 15, he fell in love, and he supposedly said in one of his journals that, and thus with me began love and poesy. And so, anyways, he continued on, and he continued to publish poetry, and of course he did not live very long. He had a bad heart and died at like 37 or something like that. And this engraver, I forget what his name is, but it doesn't matter. James Johnson was an engraver and invited him to work with him to create what he called the Scots Musical Museum. And Burns spent the last 12 years of his life working on that, basically collecting, editing, rewriting poetry, or rewriting poems and songs, and then also taking traditional Scots dance tunes and writing his own poems to them. And as we know, that's the bulk of his art, his work, are all these songs. And he literally continued to do that until his deathbed, which is impressive. Burns is considered a pre-romantic. He predates Coleridge and Wordsworth, but they kind of come from the same tradition. He was a lyric poet as opposed to the other poetry that was going on at the time. Poetry that involved love, drink, friendship, patriotism, and bawdry is pretty much much of what the poems are about. Anyways, the poem itself, there's a lot of contradiction in Burns and in this poem between like Scots and Scots English, as well as the kind of, he idealized the kind of lascivious, bawdy, carefree poet, and he really he loved that. But at the same time, he felt, because he eventually became, he got married and had kids. I mean, he had tons of other kids illegitimately, but that he should have these traits, that he should be more responsible. And so in this poem, he makes fun of himself, as well as makes fun of the idea of being part of a more righteous or prudent part of society, etc. So let's see, what else? One of the things about this poem is that it involves this supernatural kind of element, and it's kind of like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge as well as Kubla Khan, where this wacky thing happens, The romantic is the idea is that somebody goes off and does something, experiences something otherworldly, and then comes back to tell us about it. And that's sort of what happens here. Burns is kind of like Shakespeare in the sense that he was writing about something that people already knew. I mean, a lot of Shakespeare plays, Shakespeare rewrote stories that people already knew. So when people went to see his plays, they were familiar with the basic idea, but he made it his own. And in this poem, Burns makes his own a traditional ghost story about Kirk Alloway. So anyways, those of you who might already know this, I'm not going to be blowing any plot here. And those of you who don't, I'll just kind of tell you the arc of the story so it will help you because. So basically what happens is it's the end of the day in a market. And Tam and buddies go off and get drunk. And he's thinking about the fact that or at least the narrator is thinking about the fact that his wife is sitting, worrying about him and all this stuff because he's off partying and not coming home. And, they get kind of liquored up, and he starts flirting with the barmaid and stuff. And outside, the storm's raging. And then that's it. It's time. I don't know, the bar closed, probably. I don't know. It doesn't really say. But he goes out on his horse and goes out across the countryside, goes home. And he comes across Alloway Kirk. And he sees lights on, and all these weird things are going on. So he's observing these witches and warlocks. Warlock, remember that. You guys are going to do something when I say warlock. He's watching this, and that's most of the poem is him watching what's going on. And he forgets himself. And at one point he says, "Well done, Cutty Sark." And of course, the lights go out, and the demons chase him. And that's pretty much it. And then his horse gets her tail bit off, and that's the end of the poem. So, that's that. All right? So now I'm going to read it.